If you want to be president, the best thing to do now is to convince Donald Trump you'd be a great vice president and get on the ticket. If Joe Biden comes out and has a great debate in the sense that he seems lucid and fun and funny and engaged, I think it's better than the alternative, but I don't think it's suddenly going to transform the race.
Already in these battleground states that Joe Biden is losing, he spent tens of millions of dollars in those states. And if anything, he seems to be going backwards instead of forwards.
All right. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope for the fathers out there, you had a great day. I know I did. It was relaxing and nice. I got some nice cards and calls with the kids. So anyway, just what you want. Nice, relaxing day, getting ready to kick the week off. Anyway, a lot going on in the world of politics. Let's see. There's three big things I want to touch base on. Number one, the Veep stakes. It's in full gear. I'll talk about that in a second. Number two, debate rules. CNN has put out all their new rules. They're going to cut the mics off when the candidates aren't speaking. There's going to be 2 breaks, which is interesting because that's not normally how it works, but whatever. Candidates are going to determine who goes first during a coin toss. Anyway, I think the funny thing about this is the media thinks that somehow this is disadvantaging Trump. I actually think it's going to benefit him. Turning the mic off, letting Joe talk. Okay. I think that this is going to be an advantage to Trump. Letting them get into the substance of it, Trump's going to prepare for that. They're going to cut him off. The shenanigans of that first debate from last cycle won't be there because they're cutting off his mic. I think that actually hurts Biden because when he talks, it doesn't do himself any benefit. All right, so we'll get into this with Mark Halperin. The Veep stakes, Politico out with 8 candidates on their list. I wonder if there's room for more. I'm going to ask Mark about that, and then who he thinks are in the top 3. And then over the weekend, Biden was out in LA with Kimmel and all of these, quote, Hollywood people. And I want to talk to you about this later in the week because there's a big difference in the language that they use to describe this event versus where Trump was. It's all great. I'll talk to you about this, but I've said before, words matter. And this week, I'm going to break this down why I think that is important to understand because how they're framing this election is important. All right, before I get to Mark, I get it. We're all getting hit up these days about investing in precious metals and gold. I went to the folks at bishopgoldgroup.com/Sean, had a conversation with the folks there. They're full of integrity and experience. They were able to help guide me as I began a journey through investing with precious metals. They talked to me about how much I wanted to invest, what the right allocation was. If you have a 401k or an IRA that's sitting around, maybe that's what you want to do. But even if you just want to get into it because you hear about this all over the place, these are the people to talk to because it's trying to do this on your own. I'm not sure that's the smartest move. To me, it made sense to sit down with people who've been in this for decades, who have tons of experience, a proven track record, and are full of integrity. That's the people at Bishop Gold Group. When I made a decision to use my money to invest in this, that's where I went. Go to bishopgoldgroup.com/Sean and do what I did when it came to investing in gold and silver. I know you get a ton of opportunities to invest in different places. This is where I put my money, bishopgoldgroup.com/Sean. All right, let's bring in Mark Halperin and play the Veep Stakes game. Hey, Mark, I hope you had a good Father's Day and are ready to kick off the week in style.
It was outstanding. Lots of swimming. So if my eyes look a little red, it's not because I was up late. It's the chlorine.
Oh, I was about to say, whether you went in the ocean or not, I still think it's a little chilly for the ocean.
No, just a pool.
Just a pool. It's never just a pool, though. It's always a great weekend. All right. Well, Politico did this story that came out this morning, and it lists 8 potential vice presidential candidates for Trump. I'm sure you've seen it, but it's no one that is going to be surprising, right? So they've got this top tier: Marco Rubio, senator from Florida; Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota. They're at the top, and then J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, and then you've got Elise Stefanik, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, et cetera. Is there anyone that's on the list that Tom Cotton from Arkansas is on there as well that you don't think that you think might be still under consideration? Politico made it sound very certain. There are 8 candidates being vetted. Are there more in your mind?
Sean, according to my sources, Donald Trump will pick either one of the people on that list of 8 or someone else. Look, they're
You
putting
are
out
the best source. Yeah, you knew it. You
exactly.
always bring
They're,
it.
they're putting out that list. My hunch is that it will be someone on that list, in part because I don't believe the vetting circle's wider than that, but it could be a surprise. We know that all other things being equal, Donald Trump would prefer it be a surprise.
Right.
From talking to people about the list, talking to people who are on the list or their aides, in talking to people what Donald Trump is looking for, and using what I have in less abundance than you do, my knowledge of Donald Trump, I'm still thinking Burgum, Rubio, and Vance are the top tier.
Okay,
I have no idea whether that's really right, but that's my sense of things.
I think you're right. So let me go through a couple of my thoughts and have you respond. First of all, for a while, Katie Britt was the one that everybody thought. Did she just blow it in the State of the Union response? Is that why?
The problem with Katie Britt was the one big doubt that Mar-a-Lago had about her was, would she be seen as too young, not experienced enough on the national stage? And blowing her audition ended any prospect that she could be picked. It's just too risky. I think this is something safe to say. They're not looking for a long ball. This is not John McCain behind picking Sarah Palin as a Hail Mary. They think they're ahead, and they think that they must do no harm with this pick. Katie Britt, as talented as she is, just too risky.
I agree. Okay, good point. My dark horse, and I've said it before, who's not on the list is Lee Zeldin. Agree or disagree?
Disagree.
Oh,
disagree.
Okay, tell me why I'm wrong.
Because he falls short in too many of the areas that I think they're looking for. It's not a wow pick. I don't think he can bring in as much money as some of the other people under consideration. He doesn't help Trump with any weak area, and he's not somebody who I think is going to be seen as instantly recognized as ready to be president. Which is not to say he isn't, but I just don't see the logic of Lee Zeldin.
All right, and as I said, just so I'm clear, I think that's the dark horse.
Yeah.
I think that I don't disagree with some of what you said, but I also do think he could tap into the Jewish money. He's very well thought of in that community. He did a great job as governor. I think Trump thinks, I think he's more MAGA than some of the other people under consideration. He knows how to promote Trump. He did well. He did not win the gubernatorial race, but his expectation level, he carried others over the finish line. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Let me just say, I don't disagree that he brings some stuff, but I don't think he brings nearly enough. And Lee Zeldin is not as polished as Rubio or Vance. He's still a little bit, I won't say amateur hour, but he's not an A-level surrogate the way those guys are.
Okay. Fair enough. Let me ask you this, because we keep dancing around this, what someone brings to the table. And I think you and I are aligned on this. I think I agree with your assessment that Trump thinks he's ahead and he wants a buddy, a contemporary. He doesn't look at this and says, wow, that person can help me get over the top here. Yeah. He wants a partner, a loyal promoter of him and his policies. What do you think beyond that some of these people bring?
The ability to bring in $1 billion or so, the ability to beat Kamala Harris in a debate, the ability to go on TV and defend Trump, the ability to bring together different parts of the Republican Party. And in the case of Marco Rubio, the capacity to maybe bring in more Hispanic vote. But what all three of them bring is the only thing in the end that matters as the main thing. Everything else is gravy or addition, which is, are they perceived as ready to be president? Will the press and the public look at them and say, Trump did the responsible thing? There are a lot of unorthodox things about Donald Trump in general and about this candidacy, but that iron rule applies to him. If he picks someone who people say, yeah, he did a responsible thing, I could see that person as vice president, I could see that person as president. Everything else is secondary and tertiary to that.
Okay, so I from a buddy / loyalty / contemporary standpoint, trust, bring in money. I think I put Burgum at the top of the list. Do you agree or disagree?
I do, for the reasons you said. I think the thing that Burgum doesn't have that the other two have, and certainly that Rubio has more than Burgum and Vance, is Burgum's been on the national stage for 20 minutes.
Right.
He was not a great presidential candidate. He's been a great surrogate. I'm told he's done very well down at Mar-a-Lago on the road with President Trump. That Donald Trump likes his wife as well, which is important to him. But you're just taking a little bit of a roll of the dice with the guy. He's an adult. He's got great experience in business, but his national political experience is North Dakota, which is, again, no offense to my friends in North Dakota, it's not Chicago, right? It's not Florida. It's a small state. It's got a different kind of politics. Now, I've been very impressed with him in media. I've been impressed when he ran for president and didn't do well. I'm impressed with what a grown-up he is. But at the same time, if the primary goal is pick someone who doesn't blow up on the launch pad, you're taking a risk with him because he just hasn't been around.
Yeah, I agree. Although I will, I think we're on the same page on this analysis because I think what you've seen of him so far, no gaffes. He hasn't said anything that he's had to walk back. He was a CEO. He understands HR, right? And when I say that, I mean that he understands what you can and can't say in a workplace. It was a big company bought by Microsoft. I think that's important.
We're agreeing, as we often do, but I'll push back on that because, as you know, some CEOs make the transition to politics great. Some, as CEOs, expect command and control,
right,
and to just ask for stuff and not get it. And particularly when you're vice president, when Mar-a-Lago is going to tell him, here's who you're hiring, here's where you're going to fly, here's where you're going to campaign, here's where you're going to raise money. It seems like he's on board for that. But again, you're taking a risk. He's only been a chief executive. He's never been a number two.
Right. Oh, I see. The thing that so again, I think we're in visceral agreement here. The thing that's interesting is I always tell people, if you've watched the Mike Pence movie, you know what you're going to get. And he's watched the Mike Pence movie. He goes, okay, Mike was a former governor. This is the role he played. This is what I would be getting. I'd be getting this job. This is the suit that I have.
And look, there's another element that we haven't talked about yet that's not nearly commented on enough because of the unique circumstance. Donald Trump is term limited. Whoever he picks, unless it's an absolute caretaker, has the potential to play their cards right, not seem overly ambitious and piss off Trump, but play their cards right and be the front runner for 28.
100%.
And so Burgum wants to be president. If you want to be president, the best thing to do now is to convince Donald Trump you'd be a great vice president and get on the ticket.
Hey, listen, I think this is the greatest bet in the world for a lot of reasons. It's like when people say that Kamala Harris should step down or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, are you kidding me? That woman is sitting there, rubbing her hands going, I am literally a heartbeat away from being president of the United States. I don't mean to interrupt this conversation with Mark, but just as I'm interrupting this conversation, our worlds can get interrupted by a power outage. Sometimes it's a natural disaster, some kind of weather-related thing. Sometimes it's an attack on a power grid. We don't know. That's the beauty of having a Patriot Power Generator 2000X in your house, just like I do. I used to have a regular generator, and when we had an incident several years ago, I had to run up the street, hope that one of the gas stations was open, one was closed, one was open, fill up the gas tank, bring it back down to the house, fill up the generator for a few hours, try to run the cords in the house. With a Patriot Power Generator 2000X, you don't have to worry about that. It runs off solar panels that come free with it. You don't have to worry about gas. You don't have to worry about fumes or noise. You can bring it into your house. It powers everything for hours on end. I'm talking your refrigerator, computer, phones, medical devices. Guys, bringing the Patriot Power Generator in your house is super helpful. Plus, because it is portable, you could bring it to a friend's house. You could bring it outside, a family member in trouble. This is the solution that you want to have in a time of emergency. Go to 4patriots.com/Spicer, 4patriots.com/Spicer. Let's get back to the list, though. The Rubio one, I think he'd be fantastic. That being said, I can't get over the Florida issue. Okay. Right. So it's easy. You resign and then you say, what? I go where? Because the one thing that no one has explained to me, and there's options. Where do you go? Rubio would have to become not just a resident, but a voter somewhere quick, right?
Well, he doesn't have to do it till after they win, as I understand the law, right? Doesn't have to happen until the day the electoral college meets. And if he's on the ticket, they'll have a plan, which is they'll find a state where it's easy to establish residency, where he can buy whatever property he needs to buy and just say, I now live here. Could be Maryland or Virginia if their residency laws are accommodating. I haven't looked into that yet. If he's going to be vice president, he probably wants to move his kids to Florida, to Maryland or Virginia or DC and put them in school there. So I don't think they claim there's a secret plan. They've told me that for a while. The Rubio people say, yes, there's a secret plan. So I don't see that as a barrier anymore, as long as he's willing to move. And again, if he's vice president elect, I think I'll move.
It's fascinating. The insight is so helpful, because I had assumed that he would have to, when he got on the ballot, have had residency somewhere. But what you're saying is no, it's just when he's sworn in, because
not when he's sworn in, when the electors meet.
Right, which is fine, because you've got now up till January, right?
The electors meet in December.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks. See, this is why you're so good. And I'm actually a former elector. I should know this. But that's interesting. Okay, so he's got a lot more time than I had initially assumed. That does help this. And from your reporting, is this something that, Rubio's team is on board? They're like, I get it. I have to resign, and I do that.
Well, again, he doesn't have to until they win. And if they don't win, he doesn't have to move.
Oh, so he can stay. He can literally say, I'll be a senator. My plan will be that in November, if that wins, I just have to find a state within 30 days I can be a resident of.
Yeah. It's really not that big a barrier.
Okay. See, this is, you just took
That's my understanding of the law. I'm not a lawyer, but I've looked into it.
No, but that takes the report. That makes it a lot easier, as you've said. It's a lot less risky.
Not risky at all, really. What's in the Constitution is that members of the Electoral College cannot vote for one person from the same state, the electors of that state. So really the only problem is you risk losing the electoral votes of Florida. The fact is, if Trump wins in a landslide, if he wins all the toss-up states and then say wins Minnesota, etc., the buffer might be big enough that Rubio could still get to 270 electoral votes without Florida, and he wouldn't have to move.
God, that would be fascinating. Then you only have to worry about it when you run for re-election. All right, well that's super.
No, then he wouldn't have because he's not going to run for re-election.
Oh, you're right. Wow, this is like solve.
A lot of solves.
Just as a side note, because Politico brought this up in their story today, they were like, well, the other issue is DeSantis, like they don't want DeSantis to name a replacement. And I'm like, I don't know that that's a big deal. I mean, DeSantis is policy-wise simpatico with Trump, so he's not going to pick some random.
He's not going to pick someone who's anti-MAGA or who isn't going to vote with the conference. No, I've heard that too. I think that's ridiculous. And again, if Trump's president-elect, which is the scenario we're talking about, I think Rubio will probably be inclined to check with Susie Wiles or somebody before she decides who to pick.
I was going to say, DeSantis gets the joke, and he's not going to screw this up after the last. So let me just round out that top three real quick. I've heard a lot of chatter about J.D. Vance, obviously very close to Don Jr. They sort of believe that he is real MAGA. He gets the essence and the ethos of the MAGA movement. That being said, where do you think he fits in that top three?
Well, all three of them do something else, which we haven't really hit explicitly, which is they send reassurances to the establishment. All three of them, more or less, send a signal to CEOs and, small town bankers, et cetera, that even though they're MAGA, they're conversant in traditional republicanism. J.D. Vance's interview with Ross Douthat of the New York Times, Ross Douthat, I recommend to anybody who wants to understand why he's attractive to Florida, to Mar-a-Lago. He was extremely articulate in taking up the case of Donald Trump and finessing some of the more complicated and controversial issues. I thought he didn't make any sense. I was not, just intuitively, I did not think he would be high on the list, despite his friendship with Don Jr. And I wasn't hearing his name much. I'm now hearing from some people that he's the pick.
Oh yeah,
that this is what's happening. And I don't rule it out, particularly after reading that interview. My skepticism about him is the transition he made from 2016, saying Donald Trump might be America's Hitler, to going full MAGA. Now, Rubio made a transition. Burgum made a smaller transition. Lots of people in the party have done that. But I just didn't see him as necessarily solid enough. He's young. He doesn't have as much experience in the national stage as Rubio. But I think that he might be, if he's the pick, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. And what he brings is an appeal to the rural areas and the ex-urban areas, which could drive this Trump victory.
So I agree. I think it's weird because depending on the day, I think I can make a case for any of those three, but I agree that it's that top three. The rest of the list that Politico had is Elise Stefanik, Byron Donalds, Dr. Ben Carson, Tom Cotton from Arkansas, and Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina.
The only person on that list who I currently take seriously is Cotton. I think the rest of them are way down. They just don't bring nearly enough, and they're all risky. None of them, if you close your eyes and imagine Donald Trump watching any of the others debating Kamala Harris, you can just see Trump thinking, they're losing this, and that he just that's too big a risk.
Yeah, okay. You and I learned a lot, but I think we're simpatico on the picks. Let me switch to the debate a little. So you got the CNN debate coming up over the weekend. They announced the rules. Who do you think the debate benefits the most right now?
Well, Biden, only because he's behind, and he wanted the debate early because they needed something to change the game. And he's when he's rested and prepared, he's done pretty well, even in his diminished state. So I think Trump could be the winner. It's not like there's only upside for Biden and not for Trump, but I think Biden benefits more because he needs it.
So am I wrong that I keep urging Team Trump to be careful with the expectations for this debate? Because right now they've talked about how old he is, how he can't string two sentences together. And my view is, guys, careful, because at some point, all he has to do is go full State of the Union, which is rest for like 5 days, walk out, and people are going to say, wow, he still got it.
Well, I have a kind of a nuanced view of this. It's too late for them to fix the expectations game, in part because they screwed it up, but in part because that's the press narrative. The press narrative is Biden doing this to prove that he can string sentences together. I think what people, though, are doing is overcorrecting. If Joe Biden comes out and has a great debate in the sense that he seems lucid and fun and funny and engaged, I think it's better than the alternative. But I don't think it's suddenly going to transform the race because he's got other problems that are keeping him down behind Trump besides that. So it's better for him, and it'd be a great step for him. But I don't think that, like, him stepping over the low expectations is somehow a game changer. It punches a ticket he needs to punch, but it doesn't revolutionize the race. So if he's simply lucid as opposed to winning the debate outright, I don't expect the polls to change much.
And is that because of the same dynamic that was present at the State of the Union, which is the media the day after and the night of the State of the Union were so praiseworthy of Biden, and yet the polls that came out in the week that followed it didn't show that people actually moved, right? I think the press liked the speech. And so is the same dynamic at play here, where it's like he's impressing or would be impressing the media and influencers, but not necessarily the electorate?
Well, impressing the left, right? The State of the Union was a laundry list of things to appeal to the left, very little to appeal to the center. And I subscribe to the school that says one of Biden's problems now, and you see it in the data, is moderates and independents are just nowhere near as big with him as they were in 2020. So style matters and performance matters. But if all he does in the debate is talk about the importance of a path to citizenship for illegal people in the country illegally, and if all he does is talk about eliminating fossil fuel, and all he does is not have an answer for how to deal with inflation, then I think, again, that's not going to solve his problem, just as State of the Union didn't solve his problem.
So what, in your opinion, does Trump need to do to have a successful night?
When the right thing to do is to be on offense and really pressing Biden on inflation and foreign policy and immigration, do that. And when the right thing to do is to be future oriented and talk about his own plans and vision and be kind of dignified, do that. That would be my sense.
So don't repeat debate one from last cycle.
I mean, I think he can't give up. Trump has to be Trump. He can't sort of, suddenly become, Ronald Reagan and just, say, there you go again. He's got to be himself. But I think that I agree with Karl Rove and Bill Clinton. Elections are about the future.
Right.
And if he picks his spots, if he says, there you go again, when Biden tries to talk about democracy and Trump's convictions, and he says, you say you want to talk about America's families, you're not talking about America's families. You're talking about your justice persecution of me. I'm talking here about your horrible record on inflation. I think he'd do quite well.
You do a lot of these two ways where you bring in folks, have conversations. They're fascinating. I've encouraged people to go check them out. Obviously, if you can join Mark's subscription service, you get even more and really in-depth thing. But one of the groups that you've really hit on are these double haters, people who don't like either of the candidates, but are going to be, I think, crucial when it comes down to a lot of these key states. Where do they sit right now?
They're a funny group, depending on the poll and the question. Sometimes they look more Trump, sometimes they look more Biden. But right now, they're up for grabs. I don't think we have an answer to that. And we also don't know necessarily how they'll vote. A lot of the double haters who are unquestionably depressed and displeased with the choice, they might vote for Kennedy. They might not vote. They might turn out to vote, but not vote for the presidential. They might stay home. So right now, I think there's a mixed data on which way they're leaning if they're going to choose between Trump and Biden. But I think the more, at least as important, is to watch what else might they do besides vote for the two major party nominees.
Okay. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about where the sort of what we're missing right now. Okay. So you see all of these polls, state polls among ideology, black men, Hispanic, all seemingly favor Trump. Okay. And yet I see a lot of respected Democratic operatives, pollsters say, guys, stop wetting the bed. Remember 2022, we overperformed. We're overperforming in a lot of these special elections. It is now the left that is saying, don't believe the polls.
Right.
It's interesting, the dynamic, right? Normally Trump should be behind in a lot of these and all the narrative, right. Okay, and Biden should be surging. But what is the ground truth, if there is any?
Yeah. Well, look, as you know, polls are only as good as understanding who the voters are. And if it's a poll of ostensibly likely voters, who's a likely voter in this very strange election? So I think what Democrats are counting on is that their people will be enthusiastic. That runs counter to the reality that Trump leads the movement and Biden doesn't. But if you do look at the data, it's pretty consistent. Trump, as contrary to the past, Trump does better with registered voters than he does with likely voters. And one thing the Biden people are counting on is turning people out through early vote by mail, absentee ballots. That's something Donald Trump now has religion on, but as you know, spoke previously about it in a very negative way. So one thing the Democrats are counting on to outrun the polls is by turning people out using the methods they used in 2020 during COVID, whether it's, you call it ballot harvesting or just a good ground game, to get those votes out and banked before Election Day. That could be a difference in a close race.
All right. I want to ask you one last question that I hope to repeat when we check in over the next few months. If you had $100 right now, and I'll give you the fake $100, and you had to put X amount on Biden or X amount on Trump, how much would you put on Trump and how much would you put on Biden?
I'd put 70 on Trump and 30 on Biden.
Interesting. All right. We're going to continue to play that game as the cycle moves on. Mark, I always appreciate your insight and obviously learned a lot, especially about Marco Rubio. So appreciate it. Continue to go to walkingduck.com.
Let's finish where we started on swimming. Marco. You say Rubio. Marco.
Rubio.
Marco.
Doug Burgum?
Yeah. WalkingDuck.com/Mark. WalkingDuck.com/Mark.
There you go. And like I said, always
great.
You can get more of that information. It's like 24/7. Mark is always open. If you go to his site, check it out. Amazing insight. You get there a lot more than just when he checks in with us. So thanks, Mark. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. Good to see you.
All right. Thanks to Mark. I want to bring in the president's pollster, Jim McLaughlin, to break it all down. Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing good. Listen, I was talking to Mark Halperin. I was asking him about the polls. And I said to him, the thing that I find interesting is you sort of have this dynamic right now where the state polls, and we can talk about them in a minute, and then these sort of ideological polls, like black men, Hispanics, whatever. So much is favoring Trump, which you would get excited about. I get excited about. But then I listen to these sort of establishment Democratic pollsters and operatives who are like, oh, our side needs to stop wetting the bed. We're winning special elections and don't believe the polls. So I said to Mark Halperin, like, okay, I get it. It's kind of interesting that now the dynamic has flipped, right? It was the Republicans that used to say, don't believe the polls. Now the Democrats. So what he sort of posed an interesting question I want you to answer. He said it really is going to depend on who is modeled as a likely voter.
Without a doubt. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump has overperformed going back into the 2016 election, which you were very much involved with, and the 2020 elections. One of the things we've had is they've undersampled Republicans, undersampled Trump voters. Now, I think they're getting a lot of these media and independent polls are getting a little bit better at that, but still some of them, they're only doing registered voters and whatnot. But the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, when you look at virtually every single group that matters in our elections, Donald Trump is doing significantly better, especially among likely voters. And voters are telling us that they're more likely to turn out. And it's pretty simple, whether it's my surveys or other surveys that you're seeing is among the Biden voters, only about half will tell you that they're actually voting for Joe Biden. There's a little bit more than half that'll tell you I'm voting against Donald Trump. But the Trump voters are very different when it comes to that metric. What the Trump voters tell you is over 70% they're voting for Donald Trump, not necessarily against Joe Biden. And trust me, they don't like Joe Biden, but they love the Trump record of accomplishment on the issues that they care about most.
Interesting. There's this story that came out in Axios this weekend, and the headline was how 2024 protesters are pollsters. It's a Monday, you can tell. How 2024 pollsters are trying to avoid their 2020 mistakes. And it says candidates and voters are wondering whether they can trust the polls ahead of November is why it matters. The elections rocked public confidence in polling after many underestimated the amount of support for former President Trump. Meanwhile, pollsters are having to adapt to their methods with fewer respondents answering the phone. Talk to me about this problem overall, but then secondly, the difference between, and you mentioned this, maybe some of the public polling versus what you guys do, private polling for candidates and other entities.
Yeah. And look, there's not a lot of secrets in, between the Republican pollsters and the Democratic pollsters and the campaign pollsters. I will tell you, I think, look, what a lot of the Democratic pollsters do, and we work with them on various projects, sometimes for associations and corporate clients, and the Democratic pollsters do a good job. But a lot of the bad polls are the cheap media polls where they're just trying to get clicks and drive a story and whatnot. And that's where you see a lot of the incompetence, to be quite honest with you. And look, we're in a small business. We're in a small pond, Sean. If we have misses, whether you're a Republican pollster doing the campaigns or a Democratic pollster doing the campaigns, if you have a lot of misses, you're not going to be in the business very long. But the media pollsters, they seem to get away with this stuff with not a lot of consequences.
Right.
And look, what we're doing is, back in the day when I first started in this, we'd call everybody on a landline and you could basically talk to everybody that way. We all know landlines are becoming more and more obsolete. So we'll do less than 20% of our contacts most of the time on our presidential polls or campaign polls that'll be from landlines. And we're doing more and more stuff now on cell phones. And one of the things the campaign pollsters also do, we use voter lists, which is very, very important. And I think you see this in a lot of the media polls. They tend to get a lot of more non-voters in their polls because they're not using the campaign list. They're not using the voter list. And you tend to get these casual voters that aren't necessarily going to show up and vote on election day. And that can skew the results of your poll. And I'm going to give a shout out to one of the media pollsters, Ann Seltzer, who does a very good job with the Des Moines Register poll. She just came out with a poll where Donald Trump is up by about 20 points right now in Iowa. And people might say, well, he's going to win Iowa. Look, it wasn't that long ago, Barack Obama won Iowa not once, but twice. And for Donald Trump to be up in a place like Iowa, which not too long ago was more of a purple kind of a swing state, really tells you how bad it is for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
So you mentioned Ann in Iowa. Over the weekend, I was asked by somebody, they said, what polls do you look at that you trust? And I said, honestly, not many of them. And I couldn't point to one because I said, I don't trust them for exactly the reason they're cheap. They don't, there's a difference. Do they tell me a trend? So if I look at one, I can say, wow, look, Trump's growing or not growing or whatever, but I don't look at them for a horse race, right? Because I don't trust the data. How would you answer that question? Is there one that you think nationally or even in a couple of the key polls in a couple of the key battleground states that you look at and say, that's not a bad poll?
Yeah. And look, I think the Wall Street Journal poll, which, it's a bipartisan poll. It's actually done with John Anzalone. And now I think you've got David Lee doing it on the Republican side, and they do likely voters. So, and I also think their demographics and whatnot match up for where the electorate is right now. And I always tell somebody, folks, if you want the first thing you should look at when you get a poll back, and it's the first thing I look at the demographics. I look at the party affiliation. I look at ideology to make sure it matches up with how the electorate looks. And if you see a poll where Democrats outnumber Republicans or vice versa, Republicans outnumber Democrats, which doesn't seem to happen in the national polls by a significant margin, have buyer beware on that, because the last couple of election cycles, basically Republicans and Democrats were almost at parity. If you go to the exit polls in the 2020 election, it was 38% Democrat, 37% Republican. So you see that, and sometimes you'll see these polls that come back where 40% of the voters are independents, and they're like, oh, we're going to have all these independents. That's usually not reality. And again, that goes back to them getting these non-voters to come in there. It's usually really only about a quarter of the electorate are going to be independents on election day. Almost 4 out of 10 are going to be either a Republican or a Democrat. Why? Republicans and Democrats just turn out at larger levels. Why? Because the campaigns are talking to the Republicans and Democrats, and these Republican and Democratic voters, they tend to believe in things more, so they are going to turn out.
Interesting. All right. So we've seen a lot of states. You just mentioned how he's run up the score in Iowa. I saw a poll the other day about Virginia, right? We've heard about Minnesota, Maine, tied there. What states do you think that we should be looking at beyond the 6 or 7 battleground states that will come into play? And when I say come into play, you and I both know there's a difference between keeping an eye on something and someone that they're going to put their money and their people in.
Exactly. Because like you hear from the Democrats, oh, Florida's in play. They're not running any TV ads there. And that's how you can tell. Where are they up? Where are they running? And that's been one of the things that's not being reported up to this point, because up till recently, Joe Biden he didn't have to worry about a competitive primary, and he had a money advantage over Donald Trump. Now, obviously, that money advantage is closed. Already in these battleground states that Joe Biden is losing, he spent tens of millions of dollars in those states. And if anything, he seems to be going backwards instead of forwards. But the states that I think really matter, and what's interesting is I think, what North Carolina, which a lot of people think is a battleground, I'm not even really sure if that is a battleground state at this point, because Donald Trump is doing so well there. Georgia, we're seeing similar type numbers. And I think to go to it, the other states we're looking at Maine, we're looking at New Hampshire, we're looking at Minnesota and Virginia. Those are 2 states, and think about it. Minnesota hasn't been won by a Republican since 1972, when obviously Richard Nixon won Minnesota in 1972. And you know where Joe Biden was last week campaigning? Minnesota. So the fact that Jill Biden is actually campaigning in Minnesota that tells you Minnesota is in play. Watch the campaigns, see where the money's being spent, and see where the candidates and, the surrogates are actually visiting. And that'll tell you which ones are actually in play. And that's a really bad sign for the Democrats.
I always tell people the two most valuable things in a campaign, time and money. That's where you know a priority is, where you're putting your time and where you're putting your money. By the way, fun fact, because as you were saying 72, I'm running through my head. I'm like trying to remember the Reagan landslide. And you know what? The only state that Mondale, who was from Minnesota, won was Minnesota. There you go.
Minnesota.
I know
Ronald Reagan didn't win Minnesota. You have to go all the way back to Richard Nixon. And you know what's going on in Minnesota? It's what I call the triple failures of the Democrats going on in a place like Minnesota. Because you see the governor's failed there. Joe Biden has significant negatives. He's failed. Plus, you look at the big city, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the local leaders have failed there. So that's why they're looking to the Republicans, because on the issues that they care about, they know the Democrats are totally in charge. We have big problems with inflation. We've got an open border, and crime is still a big issue there, not only in the Twin Cities, but also out in the suburbs.
I know this sounds like a very naive question to ask you, but when you look at these models that people do, the economic models, and we use 13 predictors going back to 1922, and they model it out, 538, all these, and they all seem to give Biden an edge. And I can't, there's days when I get asked about this. Well, look, this model shows this, and I'm like, okay, well, this model doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if Trump wins these states, this is how many electoral votes he has, and do you ever care about that, right? I mean, considering how you do your job, does it matter to you what a model says versus, does it ever make you rethink, I guess is what I'm trying to ask? Is like, I look at this and say, okay, he's ahead in these states. These are the ones that are sort of on the periphery, the Virginias, the Minnesotas, Maine, Minnesota, et cetera, right? And I go, okay, so it's all moving in Trump's, but then you read these models and I go, gosh, maybe I should think about these other qualities that go into effect. I know that's a real weird way of asking this, but part of me is like, why are you paying attention to this? Is this just a way that the media is distracting us from paying attention to the actual votes of the state?
I think there's still fun things to look at. Do I put a lot of credence in the models? Not really. But what's funny? A friend of mine who's since passed, but a good friend, Ricky Greenfield, who was a big Republican donor back in the day. Ricky Greenfield was the one that got me involved and had me look at the betting markets. And what's really interesting, and I'm not a gambler, but the betting markets, I think a lot of times are more accurate than what we get from these so-called experts, and college professors doing their models. And you see the betting markets right now are giving Donald Trump a significant advantage. What I thought was interesting last week, 538, actually was giving Joe Biden the advantage. Now they're saying they're giving the advantage to Donald Trump because I think they got beat up a little bit on that. And The Economist had a model out there that said there's about a 69% chance that Donald Trump is going to win. But look, you and I, we've lived through this, Sean. If you remember back in 2016, after that first debate, Donald Trump would have lost. We wouldn't have won that election after the first debate with Hillary Clinton. But what happened was, after that last debate, Donald Trump had a good debate, and then he had a good last 3 weeks of the campaign. He was the guy that had the momentum. And that's one of the other things that we've seen with Donald Trump, both in 2016 and in 2020. He's been a really good closer in the campaigns. He's done a good job of getting his base motivated, especially at the end of the races. So, and I tell people, look, Mitt Romney probably after the first debate would have beaten Barack Obama. But then Obama had a good last month of the campaign. So everybody wants things to be over now. And I'm saying, look, we've got almost 5 months from now until Election Day. Yes, early voting is going to start in about 3.5 months in some of these places. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot that's going on. And we have all these world events right now. It's not going to stay stagnant like this. There's always events and things that happen during the campaign, not the least of which is we have a debate coming up.
I know. And I'm going to want to break that down with you. That's a couple weeks away. Jim, always great to get your insight, kick off the week with you. Thanks for being here. Guys, remember, we got a lot more coming this week. Huge breakdown of what else is going on in the campaign. And then plus, I'm just going to tease this right now. I have a big surprise coming for you on Friday. I'll say more as the week goes on. Continue to subscribe, hit the notification button. Make sure you're checking out all the different platforms: Rumble, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, check it out. And always on the First, channel 347 at 7 p.m. every night, right into O'Reilly. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.